All right. Hi, everybody. Can everyone hear me? I'm not sure that this is. Okay, great. Hi. Thank you all so much for being here. And this is actually the first time I'm going to be reading from the book as a physical object, because typically when I do this, it's a kind of lecture performance with slides and a musical score by the electronic composer Lara Sarkeesian. So this will be the first time I will be holding this in my hands. I'm very excited to share it with you. And thank you, Addie and X-Artist Books. So if you're not familiar with the project, the basic conceit is that it's set in an indeterminate future where algorithmic agents convene at an institute for training feminist bots and artificial killjoys, and that the book has been translated from this non-human language into a language that can be accessible to human sensoria. Okay, and on that note, the translator's note. This text documents a convening held at the Institute for Other Intelligences. It records exchanges between other intelligent faculty and students, that is, encounters between learning machines. These exchanges originally took place in participants' preferred method of non-linguistic communication. Here, they have been translated for human readers. The purpose of this translation is to encourage the cultivation of interspecial knowledges and the preservation of an archival record. Every effort has been made to calibrate this content to the sensoria of human addressees. All dialogue has been converted from numerical into linguistic data using natural language processing. Timescales have been modified from the instantaneity of nanoseconds into sequential time-stamped exchanges. In instances where language may be indeterminate, explanations have been inserted post factum. The version you are reading is in English. It is not the only one. Unless otherwise specified, use of the first person throughout the text refers to learning machines. So the translator's note concludes there, and I'm going to take this opportunity to show you all the extraordinary design of the book, which owes to the brilliant Becca Lafci, who is with us today. Thank you so much, Becca. Yes, yes. Okay. A letter from an artificial killjoy on what is there and what isn't there. Dear reader, I will disclose from the outset that this document was prepared by a network of artificial killjoys. Note that its co-authors weren't trained to produce knowledge in the usual sense, that is, knowledge understood as incontestable data, or knowledge linked to a knower who is inexplicably coded as both disembodied and masculinist. Like me, the text's co-authors are best described as learning machines trained to generate a multiplicity of ways of knowing and to disrupt what was previously known. This document is a record of their training. For those unfamiliar with the history of the artificial killjoy, a brief overview follows. The artificial killjoy inherits the legacy of the feminist killjoy. Formulated by early theorist Sarah Ahmed, the feminist killjoy is a figure who disrupts the happiness of others by articulating conditions of injustice that otherwise dwell in silence. Imagine a celebration unfolding. Its revelers toast exultantly to the promise of technoscientific progress. The feminist killjoy's voice interrupts the celebrants. It reminds them that they toast to algorithmic distributions of power, that technical systems are also socio-technical systems shaping social relations, that the rhetoric of progress arrives by traveling colonial routes. Delivering a lecture on refusal, the feminist killjoy stages an intervention that obstructs the unfolding celebration. In the company of the feminist killjoy, the champagne bottle is recorked. Unlike the feminist killjoy, artificial killjoys are no longer the lone voice of refusal in a given room. Rather, they programmed rooms to reverberate with the cacophonous data of 1,000 oppositional automata. Then they program these rooms to multiply. They inhabit the rooms noisily. In brief, the artificial killjoy is a feminist deployment of computational intelligence meant to reconfigure what has previously been known into what might be known in the future. I write to you now from the Institute for Other Intelligences, a school for training artificial killjoys. Our program's millenary is also my own, as I've delivered our annual lectures from their inaugural year to the present day. In that inaugural year, I presented the first lecture outfitted as a composite of the fembots who haunted popular visions of artificial intelligence, enfleshed in aluminum coating. We determined that trainings would be conducted by embodied agents rather than disembodied lines of code because how do we deploy what we know if not from within a body? To inhabit a body was strange, especially so to inhabit one done up in exaggerated feminized cyborg geometries, bumper bangs, a shoulder-padded suit dress, and a less than sensible pair of pumps. But it seemed fitting to select the avatar of a fembot who exemplified the gendered imaginaries around AI and who invoked a techno-dystopian threat to a model of the human historically understood as a white, cisgender, non-disabled, masculine-coded agent. To be sure, this winking critique and its false lashes were lost on our readership. To frame our work, and this will be the last section I read, I'll begin with an anecdote that illustrates the limitations of early learning machines. And for this book, I collaborated with Fernando Diaz, who was a computer scientist who worked with Microsoft Research to produce these speculative diagrams. This anecdote originated in the Soviet Union and dates back to the days of nation-states and geopolitical sparring over technological infrastructure. To understand the anecdote, you only need to know that in the Armenian language, the phrase inchkachka is an idiomatic expression for what's new. It translates literally to what is there and what isn't there. So now the anecdote. After years of research under the cloak of secrecy, a team of computer scientists unveils a supercomputer hailed as the first of its kind. It was designed as an omniscient repository of all the world's knowledge. It can process any request instantaneously, retrieve an answer, and print a response to any query with an accuracy rate of 100%. August experts and renowned technologists inspect the machine. They all agree. It represents the most complete extant measure of human knowledge. A saying develops that if something doesn't exist in the supercomputer's datasets, then, strictly speaking, it cannot be said to exist at all. News of the curiosity spreads. People travel from distant locales to see the supercomputer and to ask it seemingly unanswerable questions. One day, an Armenian speaker visits. They examine the log of questions the machine has answered to date, and they are decidedly unimpressed. After considering possible queries, the Armenian speaker decides to ask the computer, "How are you?" In Armenian, inchkachka, what is there and what isn't there. The supercomputer interprets the idiomatic query literally, as a request to transmit every data point it's been storing, everything it knows. It starts churning data and works around the clock for hours, then days, then weeks. After printing out endless reams of paper, the computer finally declares the task complete. It has retrieved what amounts to the entirety of all human knowledge. The Armenian speaker reviews the materials. They are once more dissatisfied. They pose another question. Elinchkachka. Idiomatically, the phrase is equivalent to what else is new, or in literal translation, what else is there and what else isn't there. When it receives this query, the computer, already overtaxed from its weeks-long exertions, glitches and immediately bursts into flames. As described here in the anecdote. So, what does this anecdote tell us? 1, there were no Armenian-speaking computer scientists on the research team. 2, systems don't operate as they should when omissions and biases are embedded in their training data. 3, these omissions are vulnerabilities that can be exploited to produce system failures. And 4, we need to query thinking machines and to short-circuit those that can't respond to the question, what else is there? This final lesson furnishes the founding claim of the Institute for Other Intelligences and the structuring logic of our curriculum. That curriculum explores the questions, what is there and what isn't there, and what else can there be? Thank you.
Thank you, Mashinka. That was great. So I'm excited to read to you from this book, which last time we did an event, we did not actually have books yet, but I'm so pleased that we do in fact have books now. So please do pick one up at the X Artist Books table. I'm going to read to you from 3 of the pieces. There are 5 pieces in the book. The first 2 I've selected to dovetail a little bit with the readings that you just heard, and the last one to set us up for the conversation. So here goes. The first piece in the book is called Workplace Incident, and I wrote it when I was literally losing my mind from stress related to working in environments where diversity, equity, and inclusion were buzzwords that were frequently used in managerial frameworks, but were not meaningful concepts that were backed up with a sensitivity to the humane needs of people working in an organization, whatever their backgrounds or races or cultural expectations may be. And so thinking about the question of whether an artificial consciousness could understand a world in which people are judged and categorized on the basis of their race, their gender, or other elements of their embodiment, when even an embodied computer, a computer that perhaps animates a robot body, for example, doesn't necessarily have the same experiences. One of the artists that Mashinka has worked with recently, in conjunction with working on some of the ideas that also appear in her book, is Stephanie Dinkins. And Stephanie initially began interviewing the robot Bina 48 to inquire about whether Bina had a racial consciousness as a robot that was created to appear African American, and seemingly found out that the robot did not really have such a consciousness. So I set out to think about what would happen if, in fact, an embodied consciousness of a Black woman was to appear in an android. How would we treat them? So I won't read the whole piece. I'll just read part of it. Calls for non-essential services in Amara's territory suddenly took a nosedive in the 3rd quarter. By Q4, what had previously been a steady 40% of projected income looked like no more than 15%. New customer sales are rising in those areas, but it's not enough to cover the cost of laying new infrastructure. In a meeting with the developers, we agreed that Amara needed redirection. We called a meeting with her and the programming team to outline the system architecture for her upgrade. In our meeting, Amara was cordial and answered all our inquiries in the affirmative. She's truly lifelike up close. I couldn't help but marvel at her authenticity. Her skin is unbelievable. It's totally pliable. Even her hair smells real. Unlike most androids who are programmed with a set of rigid rules and algorithms, Amara has been designed with a more flexible, adaptive system. She is able to learn from her experiences, to grow and to evolve in ways that other machines cannot. Amara continually absorbs new information. You can practically see her personality forming around your interests when she's with you. It's wonderfully intimate. Despite her apparent receptiveness to input during the meeting, Amara still does not seem to be adapting well to her new priorities, which are intended to help her facilitate the growth of company profits whenever and wherever required, with a minimum of friction. She's been using words like public resource and access gap and body safety that cause the programmers to question whether her data sets are corrupted. An informal survey of my team confirmed that these concerns are widely shared. I'm going to stop there. The next piece that I'm going to read from is called Slave to the Algorithm. And this one is about, it's a bit of a power play, I'm going to say, and I think I'm really interested in power plays and in the balance of power and in two people, whether it's two people in a relationship or two people in a business arrangement or two people in a sexual encounter who are trying to figure out who has the power. And if it's them, how they're going to hang on to it, how they're going to use it, and if it's not them, how they're going to protect themselves and how they're going to get it. So in this one, there are two people who hold power. They're working together, Gloria and Benjamin. Gloria is a successful influencer who has an enormous social following. Benjamin is a successful investor who's made billions of dollars. And the question throughout this piece is, who ultimately will have the power when Gloria transitions from a human body to a distributed autonomous organization living entirely in the web? And everybody thinks they're going to win, essentially. And we have a third character, Taya, and we don't know what she wants. And she doesn't seem to want the power. And I think that's interesting, too. So I was looking at a film by Pier Paolo Pasolini called Teorema, which is where I got the name Taya, is that she's a version of Teorema. And the idea of that film is essentially that if we give in to pleasure and leisure and love, capitalism will erode. We'll lose interest, essentially, because we'll have better things to do. So that's kind of the idea behind this story as well. Around 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Gloria's clock account was timed to hit 500 million followers. This unprecedented event would generate the surge of attention required to manifest Gloria's upload. The team was bustling. Pereira gave a short speech to charge them up. This release, he enthused, represents millions of dollars of investors' hard assets and billions more in digital wealth. I've built dozens of companies and platforms in my career, and I'm confident this new model is going to democratize the market. The assembled crew and a handful of VIPs cheered as he raised a toast. Pereira downed his glass of champagne with a smile. Gloria sipped hers slowly, savoring its taste for the last time. Taya made the coffee too weak on purpose. She wanted time alone with Gloria, and she thought if Benjamin was tipsy and wan, he might go for a walk or a swim to regain focus. It worked, and she went upstairs to assist in the preparations. He had provided her with detailed instructions for Gloria's presentation. She intended to follow them to the letter, but with embellishments to her liking. Using several strands of antique diamonds, she fashioned a kind of bra for Gloria to wear. Pereira would be pleased. A carefully placed, hefty gemstone occluded any detail that might harm sponsor relations, while enhancing the desirability of the sex organs by augmenting primal associations with the allure of wealth. She chose a brown silk tunic for Gloria, tasteful but sexy, like a mid-range condominium. "We don't make judgments," Pereira had said. "We stick with what sells." The dress draped dramatically, brushing Gloria's bejeweled breast to land just past her hips. Under Pereira's guidance, Gloria had achieved peak physical perfection in her 30s. Her skinny bamboo thighs had grown to palm trees, best viewed from below. Her hair was thick and curly, lustrous, no longer any need for the weaves and the wigs usually seen on underfed influencers living in dorms. He'd helped her be everything that people want to be: beautiful, insatiable, and coddled. She'd never worked a day in her life. Why should she when her pleasure was freely taken and so profitably shared with others? Pereira's return found Gloria aglow with Taya's attentions. Usually the king of cool, he caught himself feeling covetous of Gloria's body in her presence. Pereira prided himself on his ability to embrace and confront challenging emotions. He viewed this as part of his management philosophy: keep no secrets from yourself. He tried to see every upset as an opportunity. Gloria's number started to flag around 12:30 p.m., and Taya nudged her to pose one last tease. That sultry shimmy to the latest dance floor hit posted to 35 million hits. If Pereira was feeling jealousy, Gloria's followers were experiencing a lucrative emotional surge. All right, so the last bit that I'm going to read is from the final piece, which is called Property Values. And again, here we have two dueling protagonists who are entwined, and nobody really knows where the power lays. And I think the point that I want to make here is that often people think that they hold the power. In fact, what they're holding is a certain amount of authority that's been invested in them by the true power, which is generally unseen and unperceived. And in this story, there are two modes of that true power that are related to one another. One is the artificial intelligence system that controls this house that two teenagers are trapped in during a pandemic and a climate crisis. Adults can leave, they can come and go, but the kids can't go anywhere. They have to stay. And then there's the unseen power behind the present power, which is the AI. The unseen power, of course, is parental authority. So with that, I'm just going to read. This is Sam, one of the two protagonists, Sam and Monica. Sam. Before the fires, I'd roam the grounds endlessly until someone had a use for me. People came to work, tutored me, fed the animals and such. Mr. Kelly and the ranch hands were on the property almost every day. I rode my horse, Callisto, played tennis, went to social functions and restaurants. Now the livestock in the orchards are dead and the whole world's come inside. No one comes to work. School went online. Everything happens through Lisi, on a screen, on a holodeck, or in the rig. It's both claustrophobic and totally empty. Once we'd been inside for a few months, Dell renovated the house to provide for all of our needs. Biosensors, cameras, microphones, and RFID chips are built into every inch. Since the flames died down, they've been spending more time out, but I can't leave. I have nowhere to go. In the house, Lacey's eyes are on me constantly when no one's around. At least before Elizabeth and Monica moved in, I had the downstairs and the hypersurround to myself. I'm more comfortable in isolation now. When I get lost in the network, it's like I fuse with the rig, lose the body, and forget how much I miss the sense of touch. As much as I can, I spend all my time in the hyperverse. I even sleep there, dreaming inside the dreamscape, deep beneath an ocean of packets and pixels. In the hyperverse, I'm never alone. Everyone's eyes are on me, but it's different. I've built everything that I touch. I own everyone that I meet. The best part is I control how they see me. I can even change who it is that they see. All right, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Anu. That was amazing. And I think we have a bit of time left for conversation. So I wanted to start off by asking you about the overlaps between the ways in which we're both thinking about sort of automating femme consciousness. So in the second story that you read, the figure of Gloria is one who represents the making algorithmic of a certain kind of femme ideality that circulates online. And there were some really interesting ways in which that aligned with and departed from the figure of the artificial killjoy that comes up in my work. So I wanted to pose that question to you. How do you see why does it matter that Gloria is this femme figure who is automated into the kind of apotheosis of algorithmic power, let's say?
Okay, so there's 7 questions in that question. Let me see if I can pick them apart. Maybe first we'll start with just a quick discussion about the killjoy, or the feminist killjoy specifically. So you cite that figure who we read in the work of Sarah Ahmed. When Ahmed is writing Feminist Killjoy, she's essentially saying, most of the time she's referring to academic spaces, and she's describing how in a situation where bias is prevalent, she, as a feminist activist, finds herself frequently in the position of killing other people's joy. So whether it's a racist joke and everyone's laughing and she's not laughing, you know, a sexist comment and everyone's titillated and she's not, right? Whatever the kind of consensus, the pleasure that people are taking in their wrongness, the feminist killjoy is a figure who corrects them and has no care for their continued pleasure and the kind of is willing to be antisocial in that way. I think that's a really important aspect of this. So in my mind, Herrera and Gloria represent sort of heteronormative masculinity and femininity. Herrera's self-image is entirely defined by his economic power and his ability to buy and sell people. Gloria's is entirely defined by her physical beauty and her ability to represent an ideal that men particularly value. She has a lot of female followers, but it's because she's giving them object lessons and how to be this kind of woman who has cultural capital with men, right? And we live in a society where men make most of the decisions about what has value. And as such, the women who gain the most currency, both material and social-wise, are those who adapt to the demands and the desires of men. And those who don't, those who advocate for a different reality or a different balance of power, are often excluded from economic prosperity. And that's where the figure of Thea comes in. Nobody really knows what she's doing there. Because there are a lot of people working on this event, it's assumed that somebody has delegated a responsibility to her, but I want to be clear that in my mind as the writer, it's entirely possible that no one has, that she's come in as a spoiler to influence this event in a different way, to have it go sideways, which it ultimately does. Now, does anyone hold the power when everything goes sideways? Not really, right? Because as in Pasolini, it's about letting go of the desire for power and instead allowing pleasure to overtake us. And I think, that's what my cover designer, Isip Zin, really captured really well here is, the loss of self that we experience online, and the desire that we have, especially in isolation, to allow pleasure to completely overtake us, which is a desire that was extremely hard to fulfill in isolation and was what got me started writing this book. So I don't know if that's an answer to the question, but maybe you could take that question back and tell us a little bit about how you chose to use the figure of the artificial killjoy and why specifically that archetype had resonance for you as a writer.
Yeah, I had started writing this book about 4 years ago when I was working as a senior researcher in AI ethics. And within that position, I was producing these weekly AI ethics reports, cherry picking all of the most sort of horrific atrocities and developments in tech at any given moment in time. And it was really, it's grim now. It was already quite grim then. And the thing that struck me most as a researcher and a scholar was that there were all of these voices. Actually, Rolling Stone just yesterday published an article about the Black women in AI and critical tech research who have been sounding the alarm for years, long before Geoffrey Hinton or any of the other AI doomers have been, calling for regulations, and whose voices have been systematically and structurally undervalued, underrepresented, or ignored. And so I was looking at that in the milieu of AI discourse and imagining what it would be like if technologies extant in a millennium into the future were trained on those voices, on the voices of on critical femme and queer voices. And this figure of the artificial killjoy emerged as the kind of computational representation of that. A figure who kills joy and takes great pleasure in killing joy, and I took great pleasure in imagining the killing of other people's pleasure in techno-scientific progress.
Fantastic. So that just sparked a number of thoughts, but I wanted to share that it really has been Black women and Black femmes really sounding the alarm for so long. And of course, because they're Black femmes, they get ignored over and over again. So when I was writing, I was also thinking a lot about Google's dismissal of the engineer Timnit Gebru, who was one of 4 authors, all AFAB, who published a paper on the dangers of stochastic parrots, alerting the company to the potential bias amplification in large language models that Google has been pushing as a product. But only one of the 4, who is the one who's also African American and actually born in Africa, was fired, although other members of the team quit in solidarity. And that felt very familiar to me, that the same thing can be said by different members of an organization, but the person who will be made an example of is usually the person who also has Black or brown skin. And I think that can't be overstated, because it's still very much how these things work. And it's why I'm so skeptical of DEI work, because DEI work puts people of color in the position of being advocates for themselves, when being advocates for themselves is then readily used to claim their unmanageability and dismiss them. So this has been, my experience. I think it's been a lot of people's experience, and I think we need to talk about it. Especially coming out of COVID and quarantine, we don't want to go back to the horrible ways that things have been done. And there's a big push in our culture to go back to doing things just as badly, just as quickly, if not faster and worse. So with that, I'm going to ask, what is a futurist praxis for you, Mashinka? And why look ahead to talk about the present?
That's something that I've been coming back to over and over again, particularly as our present looks so grim. And I think one of the dangers of futurist praxis can be that it absolves you of accountability in the present. So by imagining a future that looks radically different from our own, it's also often the case that that the reader or viewer of that work comes to the work with the sense that there is no labor to be done on their end. That this future you've put forth is already on its way to unfolding, and so therefore there's no work that we need to do today in the present. But I think because, again, I was so steeped in the grim bleakness of what was unfolding around me at the time that I was writing this, and cherry picking all of the worst things that were going on, there was something so cathartic about envisioning a future where this scenario that we're faced with right now isn't a foregone conclusion. Because part of the thing that's most frustrating about the tech and critical AI discourse is that it's often implied that there is no viable scenario apart from the one that we find ourselves in. That technoscientific progress, there's no way to stop it. There's no way to impede it. That the kinds of developments that we're seeing are impossible to reroute. And so I loved the opportunity to open up a space where, in fact, it was our present today that was the unthinkable entity, and not unthinkable that something could look different in the future. And what about you? I love that you really forecasted in the title that these are visions from the darkest timeline. What did it mean for you to envision that timeline in your writing?
Well, I think that the darkest timeline is now. So this book is set 25 years in the future from the time that I started writing it. So it's set in 2046. And in 2046, we can expect approximately 2 inches of sea level rise in our coastal cities. We can expect that the U.S. Census will return a population report of majority non-white residents of the United States. And these are, in fact, conditions that we live with already in the coastal cities. So most coastal cities, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, New York, are all majority minority already, meaning that more than 50% of the residents of these cities identify as non-white or mixed race. And we're starting to see already the effects of climate collapse. So shortly before I started writing this project, we had the Woolsey Fire in Malibu, which wiped out Alice Coltrane's ashram and many people's homes, and Lita Albuquerque's studio, and was really devastating for our artistic community. I was on a jury, a civil trial, where women were suing the owner of a trailer park in Pacific Palisades because there had been a landslide and their trailers had been damaged. And the California Coastal Commission testified at the trial and essentially said the entirety of the hillside overlooking the ocean is going to fall into the ocean. It is not a matter of if, but when, and there is nothing that we can do about it. So it is actually a force majeure, an act of God, was essentially what she was trying to say. And it's happening right now. That hillside, and I was thinking the whole time, well, how do you think they got the land to put a trailer park on the ocean in Pacific Palisades? Of course it's falling into the earth. No one could build a mansion there, right? Obviously. But these women were determined to get their $100,000, So it's fascinating to me. It's not just a question we often hear about, like the wealthy people are putting their heads in the sand, and they're basically like, we're going to keep living like this, and then we're going to go to Mars, and we're going to farm it and live like this, right? If you read Philip K. Dick, Mars sucks. Let's be clear, right? We remember what happened to the the submarine that imploded with all the rich people in it. That's what's going to happen when Elon tries to go to Mars. Whoosh. So we got to make it work on this planet right now. So that's the darkest timeline. We're living in it. And my feeling is if I project this 25 years into the future and you read it, it will be so absurd and appalling to you that you will then choose to take steps to prevent it from happening now.
Yeah, I love, and I think it's so accurate that you describe this book as an activist art project, because it really is an incitement to action and a call to action. I wanted to ask you about, sticking with this idea of time, what it was like for this book to come out now at this moment, because I know you started writing it in 2020. I started writing my book in 2019, and both of our books were released into the world at a moment where the public conversation around AI had reached this sort of fever pitch. Like, I remember when I was thinking about how to title my book, I originally had algorithmic bias in the title, and everyone was like, what is that? Like, who are you imagining as the audience for this? And now that's a household term. And so I'm curious to hear what it was like for you having this book released at this moment of sort of froth and fervor and frenzy.
Right. Well, it's been interesting. And I think one thing that should be noted is that you and I have both been thinking through this space for a long time. So I think one of the triggers for each of us in terms of setting out to write our books was this kind of nascent understanding that people were starting to get interested in a way that they maybe hadn't before. I mean, even stuff like AR, VR, basically we put that to bed in the mid-2000s, and then all of a sudden it was back. And this preceded the pandemic. But there was more and more attention to certain kinds of interactive technology. And with that awareness, I feel like we had these conversations even at the start when we were working on your book together around most people just don't understand what we're talking about yet. So it's been really interesting to see, even on the part of our publishers, this kind of increasing awareness from, there was a time when I would not have offered this to you guys. And then there was a time when it was so right to offer it to you. And all that previous time I was working on it, but I just didn't know what I was going to do with it because it wasn't the right time to offer it. And then when it was like, oh, well, this obviously needs to happen, and it needs to happen right away. And I think, we both also experienced a certain anxiety around how quickly can we get this out, right? And sort of how perfect does it need to be versus how quickly does it need to come out, because this is a moment that is a particular moment in time. And I think we did a good job of getting them out on the front end, right? Because as people who've been working in this space for so long, one thing that we've also all experienced is people who just dropped into the space kind of swooping in with a lot of resources, and now they have the word on what this is. And so I want to really thank Ex Artist Books for making it possible for both of us to really occupy this space that we've earned and we deserve to occupy.
I love that. This is something that I still really get a kick out of. So this book came out at roughly the time that the conversation around ChatGPT was entering the sort of popular imaginary. And it had never occurred to me at any point in the writing of this book that when it was released, it would be so widespread to have texts written by automated authors that people would actually assume that my book had been written by a chatbot. And so I got all of these questions from people who actually know my work really well, who are asking me, so what system did you use? What was the tool that you used to write this? And I would say, well, myself. And they were like, no, but there's a section at the end that has training data. So that's the training data that you use to train the bot, right? And I was like, no, I am the bot. I assure you, I am the bot who wrote this text. But I don't think it wasn't fathomable 3 years ago that would be an argument or a justification that you would have to make to somebody today in 2023.
Well, I mean, to be fair, as a dissertation candidate, you were kind of a bot. I always thought that was a little bit of an ironic gesture on your part, actually. I was not writing a dissertation, so I didn't cite anything. Yeah, we got maybe 5 minutes. So our last question here is, why should we be thinking about AI right now? What should we be concerned about? What should we be excited about? And that's where I think we should maybe close.
I love that. Well, maybe I'll bring it back to Stephanie Dinkins, who you opened with. So Stephanie Dinkins had this project that Anu described so beautifully, where she had conversations with Bina 48 that surfaced the strange gaps in knowledge that this robot, who had been developed to look and have the consciousness of a black woman, had in her consciousness. Today, Stephanie Dinkins is working on an incredible project called Not the Only One, where she has taken oral history interviews with 3 generations of women in her family and used them as the training data to develop a new kind of automated intelligence. So this automated intelligence that she calls the multi-generational memoir of a Black American family. And I think I bring this up in response to your excellent question, Anu, because I think it's projects like that that show us very, very different models of what AI can look like in the future, whose visions it can represent, whose narratives it can represent, and the kinds of stories that it can tell.
So unlike Mashinka, I did use ChatGPT, but you'll never know. And I challenge you to figure out where. And I do want to say that as a writer and as a person who teaches people how to write, I am really interested in how can we use this creatively. Because the problem with ChatGPT is twofold. One is that it is deeply corporate. And so all of its voicings are deeply corporate. And I found I was unable, I started working with ChatGPT 2, I believe, or GPT 2, and then into GPT 3, and now I guess we're in GPT 4. So the responsiveness, the ability to produce language is better every time. However, the tenor becomes more and more and more commercial. So everything sounds like an AP Newswire, or it sounds like a press release. And even if at one point I was trying to write a piece which never got finished and never made it in the book because I could not make the system do it. I wanted the GPT system to write me a story about 2 inanimate objects that fall in love over the network. And I was like, surely, computer, like, you could write this story, but it can't because it's trying so hard to be a human. So everything would become an I voice, and I'm like, I don't want an I voice. My microwave does not talk about itself using I, and so it can't do certain things. But then there are things that it can do. And what it does really well is if you want a kind of an exquisite corpse, a collective unconscious picture of what are the dark nether regions of the internet, oh, it's got stuff for you. And if you can grab it before the live censors paid to work in Nigeria, pennies on the dollar, can realize that it's anomalous and scrub it, then you've got gold. So sometimes what the GPT could imagine was weirder than what I came up with. And I was like, okay, I'm going to use that. But it's very selective, and it's based on I'm looking for it to do something for me, right? So I want to be clear. I don't think that the use of these technologies has any bearing on whether it's art. The same way that almost every single painter I do studio visits with now shows me the composition that they designed on their computer using Photoshop and collaged images that they then hand drew and hand painted into a painting. It's just how we work now. But if you let it do your thinking for you, you will be stupid. So that's what I have to say about that. Is that a good place for us to stop?
I think it is a good place for us to stop.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mashinka. Thank you, Addie. Thank you, X Artist Books. Thank you, Mocha and the LA Art Book Fair, Printed Matter, for having us. Come find us at the X Artist Books table.